Kaczmarek, and I will tell you about shared libraries for more than 100 teams that we develop in an agile way. That's what we claim still at Ocado Technology. Let me start with a quote to make it a bit lofty. As with any shared internal library, there are tricky questions around its ownership and governance. So on the one extreme, if everyone owns it, then potentially nobody owns it. And you can imagine all the problems, like things becoming inconsistent and without any governance, right, in the long run. At the other extreme, if it's completely centralized, so there's an owner, then there can be a disconnect or there can be a bottleneck. Many problems can occur. So one could say it is a game of a balance, right, between one and the other. Like potentially when anyone can contribute to it, but on the other hand, there's a custodian who takes care of the library. Ideally with strong technical skills and people skills, so that contribution and collaboration takes place. So that's what we try to do here. And this comes from one of my favorite websites, martinfowler.com. The agenda for today, what we do, the libraries, why we think it's worth talking about it, and then in turn how we manage data in the decision process, the stakeholders, the module lifecycle, the product scope, the requirements, and at the end, some takeaways. What we do. If you look at this screenshot, it can be thought of as a shop with modules for Spring Boot developers at Ocado. So the modules enable developers to kickstart boot applications, Spring Boot applications, with an up-to-date dependency management based on Spring and some other technologies that we use. It's pretty big, it's 85 modules. If you saw the graph shown by Sławek previously, that more than half of the services actually shown on the graph use our libraries. And we want to build an ecosystem of cooperating libraries in the long run, because we have to scale on and we cannot be one place to manage all the code in the company, obviously. This is the only slide with code, sorry, if you are a Spring fan, but our users are Spring developers, so they get to write Spring code. They don't see our libraries in day-to-day work, hopefully, and they can hopefully get away with adding or removing modules from our library without affecting the code most of the time, hopefully. Why we decided to talk about it? Actually, there's too many exciting topics to talk about when we develop libraries at scale. We employ some unique testing methods. Many users ask us about it. We have a community of 140 contributors. We have hundreds of stakeholders. We've got many ways of documenting and narrating about things and other topics, many of them. We release more than 200 times a year. Well, for today, because we are talking about microservices, we will only focus on 5 topics that actually play together, which is the data, the users, the module lifecycle, the product scope, and the requirements. So this is the focus. And we talk about them also because they play together. They constitute a sort of a system, so I will try to show you today that all these things have an influence on each other. Also, we think we want to talk about it because it seems to work well on our microservice world. I have some numbers here. Our users are satisfied. I come from Wrocław, so I could talk about the numbers, but actually came and one of the colleagues randomly approached me and said that our library was so great, and he loved it. So I thought, the nice thing about it being an opt-in technology and still so many users, developers at Ocado Technology using them, even though they are not forced to. But we don't stop at that. We want to broaden the perspective, so we want to summarize and reflect on what we do. And we want to learn think about it, and if you have good questions, challenges, we are happy to discuss, because you may have different experiences. So let's start. 5 topics. Data in the decision process. I start with data because it's the key for us. We collect a lot of data, but the main data we collect is data about applications, what features they use, in which version of our library, how quickly they adopt, like is it every day or is it every week or maybe every year, from what team and department they are. You can look how many departments there are already at Ocado. Also, we look at the repositories. So if you look at the duplicated search of GitLab, we can see who uses the dependencies, classes, interfaces, configuration properties, code patterns. So we can derive many facts from that. And the data drives actually many factors of our life cycle of the libraries, and also we can discover users this way. I will show you later how we do that. Let me start with an example. Like if you look at the graph, this is the number of applications that uses certain features, like the features are the lines. And there's a bunch of features that are used by more than 300 applications, and some declining and increasing lines towards the lower part of the graph. So if we see the feature is successful, we can end an experiment and announce it's good for use. We could say, we could write a blog entry and say to motivate users, this is the new technology to switch because our innovators seem to adopt it. Or we could observe low adoption, decide that the feature should be removed to sort of keep our scope under control. Some other data decisions, if you look here, we've got users now who adopt our libraries below 2 days of average. Obviously, they use bots, Renovate bot in particular. Or we can see how many users are on Java 17. Now it's 34% of all applications at Ocado. But this is possible because we had the innovators and early adopters we have identified very early back in September, what they were doing modern things. And we talked to them, gathered feedback, invited them to collaboration, blogging together, and then being inspired by their work so that we could push more of the community to adopt new technologies and then innovate and not stay on the old stacks. Right, so I could talk about data for hours because we have a lot of that, but let's move on. The challenges, obviously, we've got growth. We've got more users, more departments, and more libraries. So we've got ideas to tackle them, obviously using data also. We want to combine more data because many teams produce data, so we can correlate, we can combine and come up with interesting insights. It's really, if you think of any combination of data we have in a company, can come up with great results and even more compelling sort of inspiration for things like blogging or checking things. And using data to support narration, obviously, and collecting ecosystem data. So in order to scale, we cannot stop at having a single repository of all the shared codes. So we will have to have collaborating libraries. We call them friend libraries. And they actually started also to measure themselves in our system. So this is an actual graph of a banner guard library, one of our business departments that decided that they will be a collaborating library. And we can already see that there are 13 applications. There's more than that, but they started to measure themselves in February. We can see how our ecosystem grows, not just our product, but also others. We'll talk about scope and domain later. We'll have a great talk from Michał about domain a bit later, but we also do domain discovery to see where these opportunities are. Okay, users and stakeholders. This is us, and this is our users. 700 developers, or maybe more even, 100 teams. And how do we manage such a big community? I wouldn't say we know how to do it. It's a big challenge, and we are actually a bit scared because it still grows. But here's some things we try to do, and I hope it's convincing. So we can actually discover users based on data. Let's start with an example. This is a dashboard we are going to give access to our users also, so they can sort of self-support themselves. If you look at the number of applications found, it's pretty overwhelming, right? How do I find users? But if I want to narrow to users who only use, say, SQS and SNS and New Relic, and they have recently upgraded to a certain versions or using modern versions, then we end up with 8 applications from 7 teams and 2 streams. So this is not bad. I could go out and say, how can we improve these modules, or are you interested in early access because we are working on a new feature? And we actually do that a lot. Or was your upgrade okay? What do you think about a certain trend, because it seems you are up to date, and then are you using these features? Have you tried this out? And if we cannot narrow, then we would try to probe users from different departments maybe, so we do not like stay in our comfort zone and just only ask the same people, right? So this gives us a lot of options. And then we end up with sort of, slicing of our community. Like there's this big community, but we can slice it. We can say some of them will be informed. They opt in to be in our channels and be informed. They do not talk to us, but they listen. They can obviously unsubscribe, but they can listen. They can read blogs. We've got metrics on the blogs, obviously, also like the Google Tag Manager and Full Story, so we can see visits. And you've got the involved group. This is a pretty small group that we can manage, actually, the small team. Below 50 people, people who ask support questions, people who are in the early access channels and help us develop new features, external contributions, and we've got the architects in the business streams who help us sort of converge the bigger changes. I would say this is manageable, and we hope it will stay manageable for another year, and then we'll have to figure out something else because we keep growing. Probably we'll have to split. Right, the challenges, again, more users, more feature requests, more variety of user. We've got affiliate affiliate organizations, we've got new streams with different requirements. And community retention. We'd like the community to be active, but people focus on their work. So we want to keep them active, to stay a community. So what we do, we balance discussion, the small group, and narration to the big group. So this is how we tackle it. This is also a way to achieve trust. The bigger feature, obviously, we try to talk to the strategic partners, the architects. But for the smaller features, we can keep our community active. We can talk to them about smaller improvements to the library. Innovators, obviously, we try to stay in touch with them, know what they're up to. There are more ideas. They're out of scope of this talk. We've got dashboard, loggers, better documentation. We could talk about it, but not enough time. Let's move on. Module lifecycle. Again, this is driven by data, driven by scope. These two factors play a role in this. Let's give an example. Like I already said, there are many categories, many modules, which, as you may guess, gives us all these options, right? Agility, configurability, reasoning, easier contributions. Like think about it. If you want contributions and we had one big monolith, then nobody would potentially be able to contribute. They will be afraid, right? If you've got 85 modules that do not, they are sort of loosely coupled mostly, then one module could have 5 classes, 15 classes in Java, then it's much easier to contribute, right? So this gives us all these options. And lifecycle markers are also additional options. So we can think of those small modules as little products. Each of them has its own life cycle. One is in the use life cycle, the other is deprecated, and we will obviously narrate to our users what to do about it. This is a bigger module. We don't want it to stay that way. We have smaller modules you can think to switch. Or maybe there was Hystrix there, and we don't want Hystrix, we want to use Resilience4j. Or maybe there was Swagger involved, maybe we want to use OpenAPI, stuff like that, right? So we want to rotate modules. And these lifecycle markers are signals to the community. Well, you can obviously invent any lifecycle markers you may want. What helps us here is like, it gives us again options to scale. So we can say experimental, things can change. So we can be a bit more brave with publishing stuff. We can be more agile because people are expecting change. And some teams will not adopt an experimental module, while others will. Again, maintenance. We want to limit discussion. People would like us to develop things in the modules, but some modules are in maintenance state, meaning we will not invest more time in it. So this is again an option to us to limit discussion, keep working on the important stuff, and also proving by using numbers what the important stuff is, right? If 300 teams use this module and 10 are using this one, maybe it's not so important. An example, this is the most complex case, like we want to roll out a new feature, the green line, and want users to stop using the old feature. And the blue line is all applications, right? What we usually do, we narrate, we over-communicate basically. Like this was what we were told in the COVID world, we should be over-communicating. And we use lifecycle markers, so we say, this one is for use, this one is in early adoption. After some time of observation, we will switch, right? We will say this one is for use, this one is deprecated. It would hopefully cause some decline in the usage, and some teams will start to contact us and ask us what will happen and when. We try to give enough time, and then we stop releasing the old feature, which obviously means more adoption of the new one. Plus, we do some more supporting narration to convince the others to move out of the old feature. Modules and lifecycle markers gives us all these options. So this really works well with a big group of users. In the summary, right, you could say all these things build trust. But it starts with data and modularity, right? These two things should be a bit obvious, but they are quite worth saying out loud. Challenges. Scope pressure. Obviously, our users want us to have more, to develop even more features. And that would mean more complexity. So we have to think of ways to counter that. We descope modules with low usage or high support ratio, high support to usability ratio. We do scope management, which is coming up. This is the fourth part of my talk. And scope management. In order to talk about it, we need to set this historical context a bit. So initially, our libraries were created by a team for themselves, and then they were adopted by other teams. So they grew as internal open source. At some point, there was a risk of growing out of control, actually reaching high adoption, and there was no custodian. And luckily, I would say a bit too late, but not too late to rescue it. It was taken over by a team, by our engineering productivity department, taken under control, invested, became a bit more modular, better documented, and it's again being liked by the community. And but the future growth is inevitable, so we have to keep thinking of how we manage that. The consequences are, we are now in a separate department, so we have to pay even more attention to communication because we are natural enemies, right? So to build trust, we have to try harder, as when we were neighbors, right? The next room. We have to manage scope actively to maintain agility. We cannot grow scope and users at the same time, right? With the same resources. So we have to manage scope. Descoping is a must, I said it already. Reasoned and communicated well. And alternatives must be clear for users. So we cannot go and say, guys, we are going to descope half of our product. they would hate us, right? And the managers would probably not be so happy. So we try to think about the opportunities, like another team is coming with a tool, maybe we now have an overlap, or maybe there's a new department taking care of observability, right? We will no longer do observability because there's a department for it. So let's gradually give back the mission to them. Please don't analyze it. It's just an example of how scope definition helps. Like, we discover the domain constantly. This is a decomposition of our modules, and the numbers here depict sort of the usage level. So if you think of the core, as one could imagine, is used by most of the users, and if you go further to the extensions, then the extensions are not used so much. The numbers are a bit off, I think, but it doesn't really matter. It's more like, again, a way for us to think about who uses what belongs where, and the opportunities. Like, I can think now, security is actually pretty separate, right? So we could think of it as a sub-product that could move somewhere else. The extensions are not used so much, and they are at the top, so potentially they could become separate libraries. This would be hard to tackle because it's in the middle, and obviously core could become a platform for other libraries in the future, maybe some friendly libraries that could just use the dependency management, some core modules, maybe the metrics so they can measure themselves, and that's it. Maybe they can use our AWS accessors because we know how to set them up. We know the credentials, we know the roles that our cloud engineers want us to set, right? So this gives us all the options. Plus, of course, if we zoom out and show our product in the middle, then of course there's this neighborhood, and this neighborhood tells us what's not in scope. And that's even more important for the discussion, because if we know data platform, security provider, and observability are not in our scope, we can discuss that with the users. Let's discuss with the other team what observability should be like. If our users don't know that, they may expect us to do all those things for them. So I would say this is a must, doing it over and over. Right, so challenges, again, scope pressure, the risk of becoming the discovery bottleneck. So what we try to do, we try to promote the idea of collaborating libraries, and we actually already have a couple of them. Try to discover the domain, so our domain and the neighborhood, which helps us reason and rescope in a data-driven way. The last point, requirements, short section. If you think about our libraries, there are many change vectors that have influence on the libraries. These are things like, stack upgrades, vulnerability reports, feature requests, our own innovation ideas, app security recommendations, cloud platform changes. Only this is what our users immediately see. They want us to do feature requests. Separate slide because it's quite complex. But what I want you to see is actually all these changes are important to our users, and we try to make it clear to them that because we do all these things for them, there's a bit less time for feature requests, but we could do more features and abandon stack upgrades. We could do more features and not care about vulnerability reports or AppSec recommendations. But because this is our core responsibility, they have to appreciate, we have to find somewhere else for some of the feature requests, potentially maybe in the streams or maybe in their own libraries. And this really helps discussion because, as you've noticed, probably discussion, trust, content negotiation is the key here. Right. So in the handling of the requirements, we've got a couple of ways to scale. Right. In the discovery, we analyze data, the metrics, the impact, the alternatives, and the priority of the reporter. We gather additional requirements. This could be done by us or by the reporter of the requirement. In the implementation phase, again, is it in scope? We know our scope, so we can implement it in the product, again, by us or by the reporter as a contribution, or during a job swap, because we do job swaps in Ocado. In fact, we now have one person from another stream joining us for a couple of months. If it's out of scope, again, it can be done outside of the product. In the reporter's own code, not so good, because it could cause code duplication, or in a collaborating library. And all these things are a way to scale, right? I mean, we are really at scale now, you know, imagine the 100 teams, right? So these give us the options. Of course, we don't want to leave the reporter like alone, so we try to provide some reference examples and guidelines if they have to do it in their code base. Challenges, the benefits. Obviously, we foster collaboration and we can scale, and we build trust. This is again the quote from the same website, from Martin Fowler. Let teams create their own components within their code bases as they will need them, even if that causes some duplication initially. Allow patterns to emerge naturally. I really like that because I've seen so many times that people create premature abstraction or premature shared libraries and create bottlenecks and create misunderstandings and stress. So sometimes this is the approach we try to take, which of course is skill of negotiation is needed. Challenges, again, the same challenges as everywhere, and the same ideas. We promote independent libraries and provide examples, but also consider RFC, like we gather comments over some time and will allow users to comment what they think about new features. Well, we will probably think about that. Some departments do it with some success, so we consider that. The takeaways, last slide. Library development at scale, as I've hopefully shown, is where modularity and data really helps with all these values. Splitting the community into layers can help scale again, build trust, and foster some collaboration. Iterative domain discovery is a must if we want to manage scope actively and scale. Balancing discussion and narration can help us address bigger groups, building trust again, scaling and planning. And our ultimate goal, the ecosystem, we will see in a year probably how this goes, but yeah, we hope for the best. Building all these values. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Do you use that tools for your own libraries only, or do you use it also for the external dependencies, third-party libraries, anything open source stuff?
I'm not sure if I understand.
So you also track their usage of, I don't know, let's say the tools that you take from the open source to track versions, tracks who uses what, or just for your own libraries that you create? We
indirectly, yes, but we also thought about doing it directly, right? So if we have a module that helps to do something with Feign or say with Spring Web for the users, that we can track that feature. But we were interested in how many users actually use Resilience4j or Bucket4j. Mm-hmm. Well, we could easily do that because in Spring, as you may know, there's this option of conditional on class. We can create a feature marker and yeah. So not yet, but thinking about it.
Do you have and do you track with that the transient dependencies, or do you, if you allow that one library is using another library and another library, so actually the module is not using that library directly and it doesn't even know that, or a team, but it uses it through the library?
Yeah, so anything that's in the runtime effectively can be measured. And actually our modules, if you look at the slide, are sort of stacks of modules. I don't know if I reach one. There's so many animations. But yeah, features are transitive, right? So I have the SQS starter, then I sort of transitively have the info and the OTP environment and whatever comes with it. Okay. And the same goes for the runtime dependencies from third-party libraries, if we wanted to measure them. Thanks.
Thank you.
Other questions? do you handle vulnerabilities? Do you fix it only in new majors of your libraries, or do you try to fix it in the previous versions, in the previous majors?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So what we do it in the newest version, and because we have metrics, we know the moment when the new major is being adopted, and it's been adopted by 20% of the community. We know 80% is still the old one. So we would, by exception, normally do a hotfix if it's a high severity vulnerability and with a major problem or a roadblock for the others to move to the major. But we try to make the major upgrades as easy as possible for the users. So by example, if you have a big Spring Cloud train that is coming up, so we'll build small steps for the users so that the transition is, a walk on the steps rather than a big jump. So we try to do that. Plus we try to educate users how they can patch dependencies individually if it's something maybe medium severity, affecting a smaller group. But because patches have become cheaper for us because of automation, we are more than before willing to do more exceptions and helping the users and patching older versions. But yeah, for bigger groups. Based on data again. So data is our friend, and somebody says we'd like you to patch this version. I'm sorry, this is the last 5% of our users. Can you please move to the newer version, because this is also the motivator for them to be on top of it. Also, it's not always easy to patch. Like if you think of old Spring version, and then you want to patch it, but then all other versions would go out of sync. So we have to think about how to make this compatible. Yeah, so that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
So I think it's really impressive. One team is maintaining such a huge community. So I have a question: how you balance this communication and technical work with the one team who is actually responsible, accountable inside the team? How the daily work looks like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good question. Thank you. It starts with the interviewing of people who we have on the team. They have to know they will be involved in discussions. So we do not want people who are only coders, because our product owner is obviously responsible for the vision of some strategic communication about the scope, about the grouping, but all the developers are involved in the discussion. So yeah, it's tricky. We have to work in parallel. We have to work on many topics because features get adopted. Users come to us after 3 months, for example, about a feature that we have implemented. So we have feature owners, and if somebody is responsible for the security headers, then he is the main expert and most likely to be involved in discussions. Because we try to break silos, obviously, try to add somebody to the discussion. But yeah, it's a mix, and sometimes it's more talking than coding. Yeah, we try to keep work-life balance though, so it's not so bad, I would say. We have to read blogs outside of work, but yeah, otherwise we work 8 hours.